And it's actually crazy. I'm tempted to screen share with you.
Sure. People have a problem ontologically with understanding that, like, humans aren't real.
Cool.
Wow.
Thank you so much for this conversation. I feel like we're at a good stopping point.
Yeah.
Not to...
Do you want to? Wait. Scratch that. I would like to talk about, or I think it would be interesting if you've got like 5 or 10 minutes, just my community's bothered me so much and I watched some of the videos. Would you like to have like a quick, like 5 to 10 minute back and forth on the conversation that you had with Dr. Mike?
Sure.
Okay.
I don't know if 5 to 10 minutes will be enough. I do have to go in about 20 minutes at the top end.
We're not going to dive super deep into
I'm more
this.
than happy to talk about what you want to talk about.
Yeah. So I've noticed that people obviously come at you a lot for distinctions relating to, also, before you do that, thank you for the last conversation. I appreciate that. No, I don't know that we were originally going to talk about that, but yeah, thank you. I've got a lot of good notes.
I loved it.
Yeah, thanks. For the Eastern medicine versus Western medicine, or Ayurvedic versus, what's the name for Western medicine? My God, I just forgot. Allopathic, that was it, yeah. Medicine, yeah, that obviously you catch a lot of heat. I'm sure you've seen comment sections, YouTube, like a lot of people go back and forth. So I hear things that you say, and I feel like I'm understanding it, but then obviously a lot of other people have different feelings. So I guess asking you, like point blank for how you would lay this out, what do you think is like the role that either Eastern medicine or an understanding in Eastern medicine could or should be playing when it comes to integrating it into Western medicine or like contemporary mental health treatments? Like, what do you think is like the most appropriate role there, I guess, yeah?
So I think so the first thing is I was taken aback by the Dr. Mike conversation. I was not expecting, and it took me a while to figure out what was going on and to recognize that his heat is coming from other people talking about Ayurveda.
Yes.
So, and it was really weird because I was like, I'm confused why you are framing things the way that you are when you ask me about them, because that's not actually the way that I think about them. So first of all, here's kind of what my journey with Eastern medicine was. So I was quite skeptical and then saw some things in India that I considered to be medical impossibilities, and even to this day are considered medical impossibilities.
Okay.
So, but once you see that, then you have to wonder, like, what's going on? And by the way, this sounds very grandiose, but this is actually true of meditation. So let's remember that like 60 years ago, the idea that meditation could have a positive impact on your mental health was considered a medical impossibility. So what I've come to understand now is that in Eastern traditions of medicine, they used a completely different set of compass. They used a completely different compass to develop a practice. Like they like used a different realm of data, let's say. We think that our realm of data is very good, but our realm of data has some critical shortcomings. The simplest of which is something called external validity, which we all know in medicine. We don't even realize that you can design a system of medicine that doesn't have an external validity problem. So I'll give you an example of what this means.
Yeah. Also, wait, real quick, can you define when you say external validity? Are you just talking about like the peer?
Define that.
Okay, good.
Yeah. So we have something called a randomized controlled trial, which is a large population-based study in which we take 1,000 people, 500 we give placebo, 500 we give an intervention, then we measure the average improvement. Now, at the end of this trial, let's say that there's a 30% improvement in something like depression. When I give this patient this medication, what is the expected benefit in their depression? Do you know?
The expected benefit, well, I guess you would expect 3 out of 10 patients you give the treatment to have a statistically significant improved outcome relating to whatever you're studying.
30%, right? So nuance, right? But what is the actual benefit? We don't know.
Sure.
So our system...
Wait, when you say actual benefit, are you referring to like the underlying physiological stuff? Or are you just saying like how it appears in their life or what a benefit looks like?
So the average benefit for 500 people may be 30%, but whether this person will get 0% benefit, 50% benefit, 90% benefit, we don't know.
Oh, sure. Okay. Gotcha.
Right? And people think, well, of course you can't know because you can't see the future, but this is a wrong way of thinking because our system of medicine, this is so hard to understand until you see it done the other way. This is kind of like saying like, okay, like, you know, gravity goes one way. Like you don't that's a bad analogy. So I'll give you an analogy from my personal life. So
Sure.
we don't realize that our consciousness has a localization in space until you have an out-of-body experience. Once
Sure.
you have an experience of your consciousness being in a different place outside of your body, every moment of our existence, our consciousness exists within our body because that's where it is all the time until you have an out-of-body experience.
Okay.
There's biological correlates to this. You can electrically stimulate this part of the brain called the temporoparietal junction, and you can trigger an out-of-body experience in someone.
Okay.
So in RCTs, what we do is we look at populations of people, and our system of medicine is designed to look at the average benefit for the average person. It's not trying to figure out what works for a individual. Does that make sense? Because we're looking at our systems of science are population based. So you're going to get a population based answer.
Yeah, by definition, if you're doing a big RCT versus like a case study, you're looking at literally the average.
Yeah. So the Eastern systems of medicine don't look at populations; they look at individuals.
Okay.
So their system of medicine is based on sample sizes of one. Okay. This is also why, and there are a couple of benefits to this. So a lot of the stuff that I taught you today, Vasana and Glishta, these are not concepts that were discovered through RCTs or research. These concepts have been discovered through RCTs and research. You have people like Aaron Beck who came up with the concept of automatic thought. We know that there's cognitive bias, but we can arrive at the truth from two different angles. The big difference is that if you get a PhD in psychology, you won't transform your life. If you spend the same amount of time doing yoga, I truly believe you will be a more different human being. So when you're dealing with sample size of one, if you look at let's say meditation versus psychotherapy in the practice of medicine is about on average changing people. But I don't know if this makes sense. You can read a study about dopamine detox and tech addiction. It's not going to result in you reducing your tech usage, right? Information doesn't create behavioral change.
Sure.
So if we look at the yogic system and the Eastern system, they operate from a subjective place. They don't operate from an objective place. Now that has all kinds of problems, but the beauty is they're operating subjectively. So they know what works from the inside to make a change in your life. That's what yoga is about. It's about the pursuit of happiness, not about, and we can do scientific studies about, okay, you have to make 100K a year. If you don't want to get divorced, have a commute that's less than 45 minutes. We have all this data. But if you're someone who makes $30,000 a year, you can't apply that information. This is the problem of external validity. The problem of external validity is for a scientific study, how easy is it to apply this conclusion to people outside of the study? So it's totally fine to say, a great example of this is there's a medication called, can't believe I'm blanking, olanzapine.
Okay.
And olanzapine is an amazing medication if you look at a clinical trial. It reduces symptoms of bipolar disorder, reduces symptoms of schizophrenia, improves anxiety, helps people sleep. Awesome medication. When you give it to patients, it doesn't work well. Do you know why?
Some kind of confounding variable that's hampering the ability of the medication to work, or what?
Causes them to gain 80 pounds, which when you are in a clinical trial and you are being paid to take the medication day in and day out, and they are measuring the blood levels, you will take it even if you gain 80 pounds. So this is just a shortcoming that demonstrates the problem of external validity.
How would you deal with, because I'm sure there are some people and real quick, you said your heart out is in 13 minutes?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So people would argue with you and say, sure, you're talking about reasonable limitations, but these wouldn't be limitations of external validity. These would be these would be restrictions or further things that you would apply to a study to make it. You would look at the drop-off rate, for instance, in a particular trial, or you would try to control for other variables or whatever in order to.
Sure. So we have trials that do that. So I love something called naturalistic studies.
Okay.
So there's a beautiful trial called STEP BD, which is an awesome trial of bipolar disorder that is a naturalistic study. So it wasn't a randomized controlled trial. So this is the other problem with Western medicine is we think of RCTs as the highest level of evidence. There's good reasons why we have that, but there's advantages and disadvantages.
Yeah, of course.
So a naturalistic study is one where you give the medication to people, and if they want to take it, they take it. If they don't want to take it, they don't have to take it, kind of thing. So there's naturalistic studies that I personally prefer. So when I see a naturalistic study on a particular condition and what works for it, like I'll lean into that more.
Sure. Yeah, I had a huge debate with a friend recently over the efficacy of a medicine, and we had a big disagreement because they said that the medicine was really was high. I don't remember. I don't know if it was on-stream or off-stream, but they were arguing that a treatment was incredibly effective, and I said that it wasn't really that effective because most people just won't do it. You get like these huge drop-off rates, and it's like the medicine really only matters if it's both effective at treating the thing and if patients are likely to stick to the particular regimen, which was
So I think even when you say best, like what are you measuring? What are you including, right? So when you really understand research, you begin to realize that like there's all kinds of flaws in all kinds of research. Now, going back to like where does alternative medicine fit in? So my area of expertise before this whole Twitch thing happened was actually evidence-based complementary and alternative medicine. The whole reason I got accepted into residency at MGH and Harvard was because like I was like, I'm interested in evidence-based complementary and alternative medicine. I was in my first research lab doing EEG readings of meditators because I was like, what the f is this? This is bizarre. In 2003. And so I'm a big believer in using scientific validity to understand what is good and bad about alternative medicine.
Yeah.
There are a couple of problems with that, though.
Okay.
The first is that So the first thing, here's why I think it's important, right? So like, it's so interesting because like on the internet and in the allopathic world, I'm kind of viewed as like radical, but like in the Eastern medicine world, I'm viewed as allopathic.
Sure.
So I think that there's like advantages and disadvantages to both. The first problem with Eastern medicine is that they have not rigorously tested anything. So we don't know, out of the 1,000 treatments that Ayurveda has, we don't know which ones are more effective or less effective. And a huge problem is that if you ask Ayurvedic physicians, they all have this tacit belief, in the same way that allopathic have tacit beliefs that they're not aware of, that they're all effective. This idea that one is more effective than another is absurd. It's just about the patient, right? Because they have a sample size of one. So they don't think that the medication is ineffective. They think that it is ineffective because of this particular patient.
Okay.
So this is like a big bias. So I think we should absolutely test them. 100%. That's what I'm interested in. Now, there are a couple of other challenges with that. The first is that I'm a clinician. And what I've learned from meditation is that like I feel a personal drive and an acknowledgement that we can't wait for RCTs in some cases. Okay. So like when I have a patient who comes to me and says, I want to learn meditation, the process that I go through with them is that here's what the data shows. Here's a set of specific practices. So there was just a huge, I think, trial that came out that showed that mindfulness training for adolescents can potentially harm mental health.
Interesting.
Really fascinating. A huge trial. So do I think that mindfulness can harm adolescents? Potentially it can, but I don't think that mindfulness is bad. I think that this is where there's so many flaws in the mindfulness research. What is the quality of the people who are teaching mindfulness for this trial that has 8,000 students? This is not a Zen master. So if we're measuring like what meditation is truly capable of, we have this 8-week course that you take to get certified. You maybe meditate a grand total of potentially 8 hours because no one checks whether you do anything at home. We have 1,000 people teaching meditation. How qualified are they? Who the fuck knows? There's no way to measure it. There's no test. There's no certification. What used to happen is you spent 30 years training with a Zen master. At the end of 30 years, you don't even get your mastership. It's not even guaranteed. So the whole system of Eastern medicine is developed in a particular way. We don't know what's right or what's wrong. In my experience, there is a lot of utility to this. The problem is that the amount of time it will take to verify, for example, the manifestation of a tantric mantra, I don't even know if we're ever going to be able to scientifically verify that. I can design for you a trial that would do it, by the way, but I don't think we're capable of running that trial. So now the question becomes, when you're sitting with a human being, this is what the question that I deal with, is what do I do for this person? Do I wait until science can figure it out? That is not always the right answer.
Yeah.
And the whole reason that we have any research on meditation is because people decided to not wait. Right? People decided to start intervening, start studying it. The belief of the efficacy came first.
How do you, because the big counter to that idea then would be that somebody would make the criticism of, well, what is it right for a therapist or a clinician to essentially experiment on a patient? Like, what if they're suggesting a treatment, there is no data for it to work, and not only does it not work, it ends up like putting them in a worse spot. Yeah.
No. So let's be clear. Yeah, that's a very good. That's why I didn't finish. So I go through a process of something called informed consent.
Okay.
Right. So what I do when I'm teaching meditation to people is I say, here is the research on mindfulness. What I teach you absolutely qualifies as mindfulness. Here are the expected outcomes that you can get based on the research. At the same time, I've been to India and I've learned all kinds of weird esoteric shit. All this stuff qualifies as mindfulness, for sure. But I believe that this particular branch of mindfulness will give you a potentially greater clinical benefit than this other branch of mindfulness. The minimum expectation is based on the RCT. Now I give the patient a choice. Are you willing to try this or not? What do you want to do? And 99% of the time, it's sort of a mood issue, because the reason they're in my office in the first place is because they're coming to me to learn this stuff. So informed consent, like, you can do alternative medicine under your license of a medical doctor. It just falls under your license. And if there's a problem, then there's a problem. So one thing that I never do is give them expectations for things that are, like, in my opinion, not scientifically verified. This is why I don't use Ayurvedic medicine. I use principles of it. So I'll make dietary changes based on Ayurvedic things, but I explain to them, this is not Ayurvedic medicine. I don't do Rasa Shastra, which is like purifying, balls of arsenic in ghee by melting it for, letting it boil for 8 hours and then making it into a concoction and then giving it to people. I don't do panchakarma, which is things like enema and all these other kinds of practices that people do. I don't do anything like acupuncture or acupressure. I focus on yoga, meditation, tai chi, and some amount of like dietary change. And the reason for that is because those are the things that have some evidence support behind it. So what I kind of do is look at the Venn diagram of, okay, Ayurveda says eat fewer potatoes and eat more sweet potatoes. But as a medical doctor, I feel totally fine saying, hey, eat more sweet potatoes. We know here's what the science shows us about this kind of diet. If you're eating more vegetables, eating more this, and the Ayurvedic diet isn't like, eat fried chicken. So they're all going to be in the positive direction anyway. That's kind of how I practically do it.
Okay.
Now, the last question I think you had is like this approach to Eastern medicine. So now I think the last thing is that, I think that some of the foundations of Eastern medicine can be clinically very useful. And when we pull a treatment out of Eastern medicine and put it into Western medicine, we lose something for sure. This is also something that's hard to understand, but you can't understand this until you realize that there is a way to practice medicine that exists outside of the disease model. And this is what confuses a lot of people, because in Western medicine, we treat diseases, we don't treat people. And people, like a lot of like CAM people will say this kind of shit, but I mean, it's very precise. Like, your diagnosis is not you're Steven. Your diagnosis is bipolar disorder, and the treatments that we have are for bipolar disorder. So we remove the individual from the equation when we're developing diagnoses and treatment. There's nothing individual there. Does that make sense? That's the purpose of an RCT. Now, practically, clinicians have to overcome this, because we know as clinicians, this is why you can't get an AI yet to practice medicine, because we know that you as Steven, your bipolar disorder, when bipolar disorder manifests within you, it will be completely unique. And even though this medication works on average for the average person as bipolar disorder, I know from the second I step into the office as a clinician that your mileage may vary. So in the practice of clinical medicine, we introduce individuality. I think the last thing to consider is that I think scientific verification of CAM stuff is fantastic.
Real quick, could you say that term twice? CAM stuff?
Yeah, complementary alternative medicine.
Okay, gotcha. Okay.
So scientific verification of that is like something I'm completely in favor of. I've worked in labs, like I was in a Tai Chi lab in medical school, worked at this place called the Benson Henry Institute at MGH. They do a lot of like, scientific research and stuff like that. I'm all for research. Like I don't think we should be, completely not scientific about it.
Okay.
But I think that if we look at medicine, and I think meditation is kind of the best example of this. So I'm kind of curious. I don't know how familiar you are with research, but if I did analysis, if I tried to figure out what makes a sandwich. So let's say I'm a scientist and I'm trying to discover what makes a sandwich. Do you know what I would likely discover about what's important? What is the minimum I need for a sandwich?
Is it going to be like an ingredient or a human being assembling the sandwich or
So
a
let's say
country?
let's say I'm a scientist and I'm trying to understand what a sandwich is.
Okay.
So like I go out and I like take a bunch of sandwiches and I measure them and I put my findings on something called a scatter plot, if you know what that is.
Sure.
This may be like a stupid question because I'm asking you to read my mind. Do you
That's
have a
fine.
sense of what I would discover?
Do I have a sense of what you would discover? I don't know. That as you include
say, like-
more conditions or things like shapes or ingredients or whatever, that you would hone in closer and closer on some general concept.
Yeah, so
of-
practically what would happen, right? So and this is a thought experiment that I'm creating in my own head. There are lots of arguments against it, but this is kind of just my take and I'm trying to explain my reasoning. I'm not saying this example is 100%.
Sure.
So here's what's going on in the research on meditation. So this is just to illustrate what I consider to be one of the weaknesses of, and it's not that this is good, but it is a temporary shortcoming. Over time, it'll fix itself.
Okay.
The question is, can human beings bother to wait?
Sure.
So if I take a sandwich, and I'm a scientist, and let's say in the same way that I'm a scientist studying meditation, I don't actually know what this is. I'm not a Zen master.
Yeah.
So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a bunch of people who meditate, and I'm going to try to understand, okay, like what is it to meditate? So I'm looking for the common variables, sorting out the noise, right? Because in this spiritual tradition, they worship this God, and in this spiritual tradition, they bow to this guru. So what does it mean to truly meditate? I look at 1,000 different traditions, and I track what the elements of meditation are. So if I were to do this for sandwiches, I have a PB&J, I have a ham and cheese sandwich, I have a Subway sandwich, I have a hoagie, I have a po' boy, I have all these kinds of things. And I take each of these things and I plot the ingredients on a scatter plot. What I will conclude is, what do you think out of all the sandwiches I named, what has the highest correlation? What's going to be at the top?
My guess would be like 2 pieces of bread and some butter or something.
Absolutely. 2
Yeah.
pieces of bread. And then the scientists will conclude that all of the other ingredients are literally noise. And what makes a sandwich is 2 pieces of bread. Then a scientist will go, I have discovered what a sandwich is. I've heard that people really like sandwiches. I'm going to open up a restaurant based on my scientific understanding, and I'm going to serve sandwiches. Enter my first customer. Here's 2 pieces of bread. Enjoy your sandwich. Enter the next customer. Here's 2 pieces of bread. Enjoy your sandwich. The next customer. Here's 2 pieces of bread. Enjoy your sandwich. This is what we do when we pull Eastern medicine out of Eastern medicine and study it in a Western way. Because we're trying to focus on the things that we know how to detect, not what it's actually based on. And you can argue that 2 pieces of bread is anything but a sandwich.
Sure.
The sandwich is this other thing. It's the stuff inside that makes it a sandwich. But in a scientific study, you won't detect that at the beginning.
Sure. Oh, yeah, I understand what you're saying.
Over time, then what you'll discover is that this doesn't seem to work out, and then someone will discover, oh, it is 2 pieces of bread plus something in the middle. So we're doing that with meditation. But in terms of what is the advantage of adopting the Eastern perspective, because if you're a single scientist and you go and learn how to make a sandwich, then the trial that you design is going to be so much better.
Yeah.
Because you know what it is.
Which is why case studies and everything are so important, even for psychology and stuff, because you can see individual stuff. But yeah, I
Well,
understand. what you're saying.
case studies have a whole different
Sure.
kind of comment on that, because
Yeah.
it's a whole different thing.
Sure.
But in terms of CAM, like I think it's fine that I get a lot of heat on Ayurveda, because I think that's like, I mean, even internally, right? So we had a stream a couple of years ago. So we had a stream on Ayurveda. Someone posted a lot of stuff. I made some claims that I didn't understand the research very well. Someone posted on our subreddit. I'm really grateful to that person to this day. And I like thanked them. And they were like, hey, I think that you're like oversighting the evidence. Like, this is not as strong as you say it is. And then in subsequent streams, we've said, hey, like we even pointed that out. And then now, like when I talk about Ayurveda, I'm much more careful. I've been much more critical of the research. There's all kinds of other problems that people don't realize. The simplest of which is, like, most people don't recognize that India has its own set of like scientific indices. They have a whole research operation, which if you Google Scholar, you will never find.
Yeah.
There's literally hundreds of thousands of research articles that are published in China and in the United States studying CAM that you cannot find unless you know what it is. And it's
Okay.
actually crazy. I'm tempted to screen share with you.
Sure. Well, we can do it later
If you-
because you're 2 minutes past your heart out. I'm,
Okay.
yeah, I'm eating your time,
but like, I mean, the page looks like it's like from GeoCities, if you remember that.
I'm kind of familiar with this. I've done a lot of like Israel-Palestine research, and sometimes for some stuff you're looking for, if you don't know how to type in Hebrew or Arabic, you're never going to find any of the information.
So
I understand what you're saying,
and so then when people say like this is not scientific, like we need to understand that between Europe and the United States and predominantly the English-speaking world, when we index all of our research, there are two countries that have the same number of people as the US and Europe put together.
Yeah.
And they have their own research indices, which like people don't realize.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of difficulty in like fathoming like other epistemic frameworks, and I think there's a lot of interesting conversation we had there. But maybe at a different point it'd be fun to chat about. But yeah, you're at 3:43 EST.
Yeah. So did that answer the question to your satisfaction?
No, not really. We should wait until we have a longer thing.
Okay, what are the remaining things?
Well, I feel like I have a decent understanding. I guess my main question is, it feels like when I watch you answer for Ayurvedic medicine, it feels like when people ask me about questions where it's like, I don't necessarily believe in this as much as you think I do, but you want to take the opposite side, so I'll give the best faith representation, and then people think that you're, my impression is more extreme than you actually are, or maybe you are that extreme and I can't tell. But so like even in my own community, like I've had people say like, oh no, like Dr. K thinks we should prescribe Ayurvedic treatment instead of SSRIs, or Dr. K believes this or that, and then every single time it happens, I'll look at the clip and it's like, I don't think it's actually what he's saying. But it would be interesting to dive through some of those things, because looking at your conversation with Dr. Mike obviously knows infinitely more about medicine and anything relating to being a physician than I do, but he didn't have a good grasp of like the philosophy in terms of like the differences of what was going on. So I would be interested to dive into that at some point. But yeah, we can do that in the future.
I think there's functional utility. So there's all kinds. I mean, this is such a not nuance, but there's so much fascinating stuff about like Ayurvedic doshas are not real. They're never going to be real. They're all heuristics.
Sure.
But just because it's a heuristic doesn't mean that it doesn't have functional utility.
Yeah, because people have a problem ontologically with understanding that like humans aren't real.
Yes, they're not.
Yeah, but there's an underlying fact of the matter that it's mapping onto, which is why the different epistemic framework is interesting, because it might be that there's a dosha or something that you would never understand from a Western framework, but from an Eastern framework you'd find it. And even though a dosha is not real, it's actually mapping onto something that might give you a unique ability to diagnose and prescribe something that you wouldn't have. That's what drilling into.
So the concept that things can be heuristic but not functionally useful is not something that most of the physicians that I've interacted with consider on a daily basis. They absolutely understand the concept because we have some heuristics in medicine and everyone's kind of familiar with that.
Yeah.
But like, I think that's really confusing for a lot of people. And a lot of the people who are anti-CAM, which I think it's fair to be, get caught up because there's no biological proof of chi.
Sure.
Right? Which is fine. Like, I don't think you need biological proof. I know that sounds really weird. I'd love to have it. I'd love to investigate it. But this also gets to things like consciousness and non-material realms and all kinds of weird and left field stuff.
Yeah.
But very practically, what we do know is that, and this is kind of what we know, is the people who investigated in these ways developed practices like yoga, meditation, and Tai Chi. And we absolutely see that yoga and Tai Chi are clinically superior to simply moving your body. And the more that we study the neuroscience of it, we see that there are mechanisms at play that regular exercise doesn't attain. So it doesn't mean that the chi is real. It just means when they investigated chi, they stumbled upon some biological mechanisms which seemed to be functional without ever doing a biopsy or an X-ray.
Sure.
So I think that's kind of like where I am. I'm happy to talk about it more at a later date, but I love talking about this stuff. I think it's like so cool, and I love teaching about it, and it's cool. Like, I don't think it's like, I mean, there's all kinds of flaws in what I'm saying too. Like, so I can point out the arguments and counter arguments and stuff because I've thought through all this stuff a lot.
Yeah, I wish that people were just a little bit better at, like, at the end of the day, if we had a huge talk, I don't know if I would agree much with Eastern medicine at all. Maybe not. But I think there's a lot of value in being able to step into somebody else's, like, epistemic framework and see what value you can draw from that. Or maybe they've got a way of looking at a particular problem that you just never would think of looking at on your own. And I think that throwing aside all of that, and then also you brought up a really good point about how it's the classic materialist problem to where, oh, well, I'm a materialist. And it's like, really? Well, what if I showed you a thing that wasn't material? And I go, well, if I can measure it, it is material. So everything is materialism. So you've defeated all forms of non-materialistic stuff, because if you can perceive it in any sense, you call it material. In the same way that, like, for Eastern medicine, if there's stuff that's discovered that's working, that's not Eastern medicine anymore. Now it's Western medicine. And it's like, okay, so it's a little unfortunate that you can incorporate every single thing that I found that works into your system. And now I'm like, yeah.
That's something that we also see, which is that generally speaking, things are no longer considered complementary and alternative medicine once we have scientific verification of them. And so then what happens is, let's say we've got allopathic medicine and we've got CAM. This thing works in CAM. And then once we study it, it becomes a part of this medicine.
Yeah.
This is what people will oftentimes say. There's a huge problem with that argument, because what that means is that you're defining this by that which doesn't work.
Yeah.
And so you will never believe in this because you're taking this and you're putting it over here, which is what we've done with mindfulness. Like, no one even I don't know if people would consider mindfulness complementary alternative medicine anymore.
Yeah.
Right. So there's a lot of historical perspectives and stuff like that too. Love to talk about it. So we can do follow up. But
cool. Well, thanks a lot. I really appreciate the conversation, the personal and the impersonal. So yeah.
Yeah. Take care, man.
Yeah. Have a good one.
Adios.
Bye.
I am going to do this.